My name is Annalise, a 28-year-old freelance writer living in Seattle. The moment I overheard my parents say they regretted having me, something inside me shattered forever. I stood frozen, feeling hollow as their words echoed through me. That night, I packed my bags silently, tears refusing to fall. This wasn't the first time I felt like a burden to them. Before I share this heartbreaking story, tell me where you're listening from and hit subscribe if you believe every child deserves to be loved unconditionally. Growing up as an only child in a middle-class suburban neighborhood outside Seattle had its own unique pressures. Our house was modest but well-maintained, with a neatly trimmed lawn my father Thomas insisted on cutting himself every Sunday morning. My mother Jennifer taught high school English and carried her perfectionist teaching standards into our home life. My earliest memories are colored with the weight of expectations. I remember sitting at our kitchen table at 7 years old working through math problems while my mother prepared dinner. When she checked my work and found an incorrect answer, her disappointment was palpable. "Annalise, you need to focus. The Johnson twins next door both got perfect scores on their math test. Why can't you do the same?" This became a familiar refrain throughout my childhood. The Johnson twins, my cousin Samantha, the neighbor's daughter Katie, all became measuring sticks against which my achievements were compared and invariably found wanting. My father, a software engineer at a major tech company, approached parenting with the same analytical precision he applied to his coding. He created spreadsheets to track my grades, extracurricular activities, and even my piano practice minutes. Each Sunday evening, we would have what he called performance reviews, where he would analyze my weekly progress. An A- in science he questioned once when I was in 6th grade, frowning at my report card. What happened to the other 5%? The class average was a B, I offered hopefully. "We don't measure success against average performers, Annalise," he replied, his voice flat. "Excellence isn't optional in this family." Despite these pressures, or perhaps because of them, I became an exemplary student. I joined the debate team, played violin in the youth orchestra, and volunteered at the local library. Each achievement was meticulously added to my father's spreadsheet, but rarely met with genuine praise. "This is what you should be doing," was my mother's standard response to good news. "This is the baseline, not something special." On my 12th birthday, my Aunt Lisa gave me a leather-bound journal with a small lock. While my parents dismissed it as a frivolous gift, she should be reading classics, not scribbling nonsense, I heard my mother tell Aunt Lisa that journal became my sanctuary. I wrote in it almost every night, filling its pages with my hopes, fears, frustrations, and dreams. I wrote about the crushing weight of expectations and my desperate desire to make my parents proud. I wrote about crying in the school bathroom after getting a B+ on a history test, terrified of showing the grade to my father. I wrote about lying awake at night, rehearsing conversations with my parents where they finally said they were proud of me. My bedroom became my refuge, a space where I could breathe without feeling judged. I decorated it with care, creating a cozy retreat with strings of fairy lights and bookshelves filled with novels my mother deemed acceptable reading material. When the pressure became too much, I would curl up in my window seat with my journal, writing until my hand cramped. As high school approached, the expectations only intensified. My father created a college trajectory plan when I was 14, mapping out every class, extracurricular activity, and summer program that would maximize my chances of getting into an elite university. "Harvard has been accepting students from your high school at a rate of 3%, he informed me one evening, showing me a spreadsheet of acceptance statistics he had compiled. "We need to position you in the top 1% of your class to overcome those odds." I threw myself into achieving this goal, sleeping only 5 or 6 hours, most nights filling every waking moment with studying, volunteering, practicing violin, or participating in academic competitions. My social life was nearly non-existent, but I told myself it was a necessary sacrifice. One night during my junior year, I collapsed from exhaustion during debate team practice. The school nurse called my parents, and my mother arrived looking more annoyed than concerned. "This is embarrassing, Annalise," she whispered as she drove me home. "The principal asked if you've been overworking. Do you want them to think we're pushing you too hard?" I wanted to ask, but instead I apologized and promised to manage my time better. Despite everything, a part of me still desperately sought their approval. Each achievement, each trophy, each academic honor was offered, like a gift I hoped would finally earn their love. In my journal, I confessed this desperate hope. Sometimes I think if I just try a little harder, work a little longer, achieve a little more, they'll finally see me. Not as a project to perfect, but as a daughter to love. When the acceptance letters started arriving senior year, I was admitted to 7 prestigious universities. The morning the Yale acceptance arrived, I raced downstairs, letter in hand, heart pounding with excitement. Mom, Dad, I got into Yale. My father took the letter, scanning it quickly. Full scholarship. Partial, I replied, my excitement dimming. But it's still a really good offer. Well, we expected Yale would be interested, my mother said with a shrug. But Harvard notifications come out next week. Let's wait before celebrating. When Harvard rejected me the following week, there was no comfort offered, only a palpable disappointment that hung in the air like a heavy fog. That night, I wrote in my journal for hours, tears blurring the ink. I don't know why I keep hoping they'll see me, I wrote. Maybe the problem isn't that I'm not good enough. Maybe the problem is that nothing ever will be. The day I announced I would be attending Yale with a major in English literature, rather than pre-law or pre-med, as they'd hoped, the tension in our dining room could have been cut with a knife. English, my father repeated, as though I had suggested studying professional clowning. What kind of career path is that? I want to be a writer, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Writers don't make money, Annalise, my mother replied, not unless you're J.K. Rowling, which, let's be realistic, is highly unlikely. I'm still going, I said quietly, surprising even myself with my defiance. The English department at Yale is one of the best in the country. My father pushed away from the table. Then you're making this decision against our advice. Don't come crying to us when you can't find a job with a literature degree. As I packed for college that summer, I felt equal parts terrified and exhilarated. For 18 years, I had lived under the weight of their expectations. Now, for the first time, I was making a choice for myself, regardless of their approval. The night before I left for Yale, I wrote in my journal, tomorrow, I start a new chapter, literally and figuratively. Maybe 3,000 miles away from home, I can finally figure out who Annalise is when she's not trying to be the person her parents demand. The 3-hour flight from Seattle to New Haven became a journey not just in miles but in self-discovery. As the plane lifted off, I felt the weight of parental expectations begin to lighten. By the time I arrived at the historic Yale campus, I was breathing more freely than I had in years. My freshman dorm room was small but charming, with large windows overlooking an ancient oak tree. My roommate Zoe was a music major from California, with bright blue hair and an infectious laugh. The first night, as we decorated our shared space, she asked about my family. Are your parents super proud? Mine were crying at drop-off like I was going to war instead of college, she laughed. They. I hesitated, unsure how to explain. They have high standards. Ah, Zoe nodded knowingly. One of those families. Well, you're at Yale, so obviously you met those standards. Not exactly, I admitted. They wanted Harvard. Zoe rolled her eyes dramatically. Parents right, never satisfied. That conversation was the first of many where I began to see my upbringing through others' eyes. As I formed friendships with classmates from diverse backgrounds, I realized how unusual my parents' rigid expectations had been. My first semester English seminar changed everything. Professor Sarah Williams, a published novelist with kind eyes and a sharp intellect, led discussions that awakened something inside me. We analyzed great works of literature not just for technical merit but for emotional resonance. When she returned our first essays, mine had an A and a note. You have a unique voice, Annalise. I'd love to see where it takes you. That simple validation from a professor I admired brought tears to my eyes. After class, I lingered, wanting to thank her. Something wrong with your grade, she asked, noticing my emotion. No, it's perfect, I said. I'm just not used to encouragement. Professor Williams became my academic advisor and eventually my mentor. She recommended books beyond our syllabus, invited me to literary events, and encouraged me to submit my writing to the university literary magazine. When my short story was accepted for publication in my sophomore year, she took me for coffee to celebrate. Have you told your parents? She asked. I shook my head. They wouldn't see it as important. It's not a paying job or anything. It's your first publication, she countered. That's significant. But when I called home that weekend and mentioned it casually, my mother's response was predictable. "That's nice, dear. How are your grades in the classes that matter?" My phone calls home became less frequent. During holiday breaks, the tension in our house was suffocating. My father interrogated me about career prospects, while my mother critiqued everything from my wardrobe to my weight. I started inventing excuses to shorten visits, returning to campus early, or staying with new friends. It was Emma who became my closest friend during junior year. We met in a creative writing workshop and bonded over our shared love of 19th century women authors. Emma was from Portland, the daughter of a bookstore owner and a high school counselor. She approached life with a confidence I envied. "You know what your problem is," she said one night as we sat in the campus coffee shop. "You still care what your parents think." The day I stopped trying to please my mom was the day I actually started making her proud, ironically enough. "It's not that simple," I argued. "It never is," she agreed. "But at some point you have to decide whose life you're living." Emma introduced me to her friend group, a warm circle of literature and art students who gathered for movie nights, impromptu poetry readings, and passionate debates about books and politics. For the first time, I experienced friendship without competition, acceptance without conditions. It was through Emma's cousin that I met Jason, a photography student with thoughtful eyes and a quiet intensity. Our first date was at an obscure foreign film festival, our second at a used bookstore where we got lost among the shelves for hours. "You're different from other people I've dated," he told me one evening as we walked across campus under autumn leaves. "You're so private sometimes, like you're holding yourself back." "I'm not good at letting people in," I admitted. I noticed he smiled, but impatient. Our relationship unfolded slowly over the next year. Jason showed me what unconditional affection looked like. He celebrated my achievements without keeping score, listened to my dreams without judgment, and never made me feel I needed to earn his affection. When I finally told him about my childhood, sitting on the floor of his apartment surrounded by his black and white photographs, he listened without interrupting. "No wonder you flinch when I try to compliment you," he said when I finished. "You've been taught that nothing you do is ever enough." "Is that weird?" I asked. "It's sad," he replied simply, "because you're enough exactly as you are." Those words carved themselves into my heart. That night I wrote them in my journal, which I had continued to keep faithfully through college. The major fight with my parents came during spring break of junior year when I officially declared English as my major. I had been postponing the paperwork, knowing the reaction it would trigger. When I finally told them over dinner at home, the response was nuclear. "After all we've done for you," my father fumed, his face reddening. "All the opportunities we've provided, and you throw it away on a useless degree." "It's not useless to me," I tried to explain. "I'm doing well. My professors think I have potential as a writer." "Potential doesn't pay student loans," my mother snapped. "Do you know how many English majors end up working at coffee shops?" "I'd rather be happy making coffee than miserable making money," I replied, surprising myself with my boldness. "Happiness," my father scoffed. "That's a luxury for people who have already secured their future, something you're clearly not interested in doing." I returned to campus early, cutting the break short. Jason held me as I cried, and Emma brought ice cream and validation. "You're allowed to choose your own path," she insisted, "even if they can't understand that." My senior year arrived with bittersweet intensity. My relationship with Jason faced its own challenge when he was accepted to a prestigious photography master's program in Berlin. We spent our last months together knowing separation was coming. "Long distance can work," I suggested half-heartedly. "For how long?" he asked gently. "My program is 2 years, and then who knows where I'll find work." "So this is it." I couldn't keep the hurt from my voice. "This is a pause," he corrected, kissing my forehead. "We're too young for forever promises, but too important to each other for final goodbyes." We parted with tears and tender words. In my journal I wrote, "Loving Jason taught me what healthy love feels like. Even in ending things, he showed me respect and honesty. I need to remember this is possible when people care about each other." As graduation approached, Emma and our friend group made plans. Many were heading to New York City, drawn by its publishing houses and literary scene. Despite my parents' pressure to return to Seattle, I decided to join them, applying for editorial assistant positions at several publishing companies. The night before graduation, my parents arrived in New Haven. The dinner was strained but civil. They had accepted, if not embraced, my decision to pursue writing. As we walked back to my dorm, my father asked about my plans. "I've got an interview at Horizon Publishing next week," I told him. "Entry level, but it's a foot in the door." He nodded, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of pride in his expression. But then he said, "It's not too late to apply to law school for spring admission." Some things I realized would never change. But I had changed. The girl who left Seattle 4 years earlier, desperate for parental approval, had become a young woman who understood her worth wasn't measured by their validation. After they left, I wrote in my journal, "Tomorrow, I graduate from Yale. My parents will watch, and maybe they'll feel proud, or maybe they'll only see what could have been better. But for the first time, their reaction doesn't define my accomplishment. I'm proud of myself, and that's what matters now." New York embraced me with its chaotic energy and endless possibilities. I found a tiny apartment in Brooklyn with 2 other recent graduates, a dancer named Lily and a graphic designer named Marcus. Our space was cramped but vibrant, filled with books, art supplies, and late-night conversations about creativity and ambition. The position at Horizon Publishing didn't materialize, but I landed a job as an editorial assistant at a smaller literary magazine called The Perennial. The pay barely covered my share of the rent, but I was working with words, helping shape stories that moved readers. Each morning I rode the subway, clutching my coffee, watching the diverse faces around me and collecting details for my own writing. During lunch breaks and late into the evenings, I worked on short stories, sending them to literary journals and collecting mostly rejections with the occasional acceptance. Each published piece felt like validation of my choice, a small rebellion against my parents' certainty that I would fail. Another story published, Emma said proudly during one of our weekly phone calls. She had moved to Boston for graduate school but remained my strongest supporter. "You're building a portfolio. That's how it starts." My parents and I settled into a pattern of monthly phone calls that were cordial but superficial. They asked about my job but seemed uninterested in the details. When I mentioned a story being published, my father would inevitably ask about the payment, as though the creative achievement meant nothing without monetary validation. 3 years into my New York life, I was promoted to associate editor at the magazine and had published enough stories to begin thinking about a collection. But something else had been taking shape in my mind. A novel based loosely on my own experiences. The protagonist was a young woman raised by emotionally distant parents who measured love in achievements. "It's practically writing itself," I told my therapist, Dr. Mira, whom I'd started seeing to work through my childhood issues. "Sometimes I sit down to write, and hours pass without me noticing." "It sounds like it's serving as a form of processing," she observed. "You're working through your relationship with your parents through this character." I nodded. When I write about her pain, I understand my own better. I rented a cabin in the Catskills for 2 weeks to focus on the manuscript, emerging with a rough but promising first draft. My editor at the Perennial read it and connected me with a literary agent who expressed interest. "This has potential," the agent Natalie told me over coffee. "The voice is authentic, and the emotional complexity of the mother-daughter relationship feels very real. It's still raw, but with some development, we could submit this to publishers." For the first time since college, I felt like my dream of becoming a novelist might actually materialize. I threw myself into revising the manuscript, working evenings and weekends. My social life dwindled, but the sacrifice felt worthwhile as the story took shape. Then came the call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday evening in October. I was heating leftover Thai food when my phone rang with my mother's number. Annalise, her voice was uncharacteristically shaky. "Your father had a heart attack this morning." The world tilted. Despite our difficult relationship, the thought of losing my father hit me with unexpected force. "Is he?" I couldn't finish the question. "He's stable," she assured me. "But it's serious. Triple bypass surgery tomorrow." "I'll get on a plane," I said automatically. "Text me the hospital information." The cross-country flight gave me hours to think about my complicated feelings. I hadn't been home in over 2 years, making excuses each holiday season. Now I was rushing back my heart, a tangle of concern, obligation, and unresolved hurt. Seattle greeted me with familiar drizzling rain. The hospital was a maze of sterile corridors leading eventually to my father, looking small and vulnerable in his bed. My mother sat beside him, her normally perfect appearance disheveled. "Annalise," my father said weakly. "You didn't need to come." But his hand reached for mine, and I took it, feeling the unfamiliar softness of his skin. "Of course I came," I replied. "You're my father." The surgery went well, but recovery would be lengthy. My mother, showing rare uncertainty, admitted she was overwhelmed by the prospect of managing alone. "I can stay for a week," I offered cautiously. Then, seeing her expression, I added, "Maybe 2. "What about your job?" she asked. "I can work remotely," I explained. "The magazine has been moving toward a more flexible model anyway." Those 2 weeks stretched into a month, then 2. My father needed help with physical therapy exercises, medication management, and doctor's appointments. My mother, I realized, had never handled the practical aspects of running their lives. Those had always been my father's domain. I called Natalie to explain the delay in my manuscript revisions. "Family comes first," she said understandingly. "The book will wait." I moved back into my childhood bedroom, now converted to a guest room with impersonal decor. My old desk remained, and I set up my laptop there, working remotely for the perennial during the day and helping my parents in the evenings. Being back in that house brought a flood of memories, not all of them painful. I remembered my father teaching me to ride a bike in the driveway, his strong hands steadying the seat until I found my balance. I remembered my mother brushing my hair before school, her strokes firm but gentle. Had there been love mixed with the pressure and disappointment? I wasn't sure anymore. As my father recovered, our interactions remained cautious. He asked about my job, making an effort to understand what an editor actually did. My mother made my favorite childhood meals, though she couldn't resist commenting on my weight or wardrobe. "That publishing world must be very casual," she remarked one morning, eyeing my comfortable clothes. "In my day, professionals dressed professionally." "It's New York, Mom," I replied, trying to keep my voice light. "Creative industries have different standards." I searched their bookshelves one day, curious if they'd kept copies of the literary journals containing my published work. They hadn't. The realization stung more than it should have. My 2-month leave from New York stretched into 6 as my father suffered a minor setback and needed additional care. I arranged to continue working remotely, indefinitely giving up my Brooklyn apartment and putting my belongings in storage. Emma visited once, observing the dynamics between me and my parents with concerned eyes. "You're falling back into old patterns," she warned as we walked around Green Lake. "I can see you shrinking yourself to avoid conflict." "They're trying," I defended weakly. "Dad asked about my novel yesterday." "And then suggested you write something more commercial, I bet," Emma replied knowingly. She wasn't wrong. Every attempt at connection seemed to include a subtle criticism or suggestion for improvement. My creative writing remained a hobby in their eyes, despite my career in publishing. The novel manuscript sat neglected as weeks passed. Occasionally, I'd open the file late at night, adding a paragraph or revising a scene, but the momentum had been lost. When I mentioned this to my mother, her response was predictable. "Maybe it's for the best. How many novelists actually make a living? You have a stable job editing now." 6 months into my Seattle stay, I attended my 10-year high school reunion, curious about former classmates. The event was held at a downtown hotel ballroom, name tags and awkward conversations abounding. "Annalise Morgan," my former debate team partner, exclaimed. "I read your piece in The Atlantic last year. Are you still in New York?" "Temporarily back in Seattle," I explained. "Family situation." "Well, you're living the dream," she continued. "I follow your magazine on Instagram. All those book launches and author events look amazing." Her words hit me with unexpected force. I had been living my dream in New York, creating a life centered around literature and writing. When had I started thinking of that life as temporary? That night, I opened my journal for the first time in months. "I've been here 6 months," I wrote. "Helping them has become a habit, not a necessity anymore. Dad is recovered enough to drive himself to appointments. Mom has figured out the bills and household management. They don't actually need me, but somehow I'm still here, slipping back into the role of the dutiful daughter seeking approval I'll never receive." I resolved to book a flight back to New York within the month. I would help my parents find additional support if needed, but it was time to reclaim my own life. The next morning, I began researching apartments in Brooklyn, feeling a spark of excitement at the prospect of returning to my chosen home. That evening, everything changed. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop. I was bringing in groceries through the side door when I heard voices from the living room. My parents were entertaining their longtime friends, the Wilsons, and I planned to quickly carry the bags to the kitchen and retreat to my room to work. Then, I heard my name. "So how much longer is Annalise staying?" Barbara Wilson asked. "God knows," my mother replied with an exasperated tone. "I'd never heard her use before. She says she's looking at flights back to New York, but frankly, I'm not holding my breath." I froze in the hallway, grocery bags heavy in my arms. "You must be glad for the help, though," after Thomas' health scare, Barbara's husband Robert suggested. "The help was appreciated initially," my father acknowledged. "But between us, having her back in the house has been a reminder of our greatest disappointment." The grocery bags nearly slipped from my suddenly numb fingers. Barbara sounded shocked. "I'm just being honest," my father continued. "Jennifer and I have talked about this a lot lately. If we could go back 28 years knowing what we know now, we might have made different choices," my mother finished for him. "Is that terrible to say?" "It's a bit harsh," Robert said carefully. "You don't understand," my mother continued. "We gave her every advantage, every opportunity. The best schools, music lessons, academic coaching. And what does she do? Moves to New York to work at some obscure magazine no one's ever heard of, writing stories that will never be published in any meaningful way. No husband, no career to speak of," my father added. "Almost 30 years old, and what's she accomplished? Nothing that justifies the investment we've made." "At least your son became a doctor," my mother said to Barbara. "Imagine pouring everything into raising a child for nearly 3 decades and having them throw it all away on creative writing." "If we're being completely honest," my father lowered his voice, "but not enough. There are days I regret having had a child at all. All that sacrifice for what?" Barbara gasped. "I'm sorry if that's shocking," he replied, unapologetic. "But Jennifer and I have discussed it. If we'd remained childless, we could have traveled more advanced further in our careers. Instead, we've spent a small fortune and endless energy raising a daughter who seems determined to disappoint us at every turn." I stood, frozen grocery bags cutting into my fingers as waves of pain washed over me. The words echoed in my mind: regret having had a child at all, my own parents wishing I had never been born. Somehow, I managed to set the groceries down silently. Moving like a ghost, I crept up the back staircase to my room, careful not to make a sound. Once inside, I closed the door and sank to the floor, expecting tears, but none came. I felt hollow, carved out, as though something essential had been removed from my chest. Hours later, after their friends had left and my parents had gone to bed, I emerged from my room. The house was dark and quiet as I moved through it, touching familiar objects like a farewell. In the kitchen, I made tea in the blue mug I'd used since high school, trying to process what I'd heard. I'd always known I was a disappointment to them, but regret wishing I'd never been born. That was a wound too deep to comprehend. As the kettle whistled softly, a strange calm settled over me. For years, therapists had suggested that I might never receive the approval and love I craved from my parents. Tonight had confirmed it in the most painful way possible. There was nothing left to strive for, no hope of ever being enough. And in that painful clarity, I found freedom. I returned to my room and pulled out my suitcases. Working methodically through the night, I packed my clothes, my laptop, and the few personal items I'd brought from New York. I left behind anything they'd given me: the watch for college graduation, the practical clothes my mother had bought to make you look more professional, the business books my father had insisted I read. As dawn approached, I wrote a brief note. "I overheard your conversation with the Wilsons last night. I now understand how you truly feel about having me as a daughter. I won't burden you with my disappointing presence any longer. Don't worry about contacting me. Annalise." I placed the note on the kitchen counter and did one final sweep of my room. My gaze fell on the bookshelf, where, hidden behind some old textbooks, I kept my childhood journal. The leather was worn now, the pages filled with years of hopes, hurts, and dreams. For a moment, I considered taking it, then deliberately left it behind. Let them find it. Let them read 20 years of a daughter's desperate longing for her parents' love. The sunrise was just beginning to color the sky as I loaded my suitcases into my rental car. The house stood silent behind me, containing the two people who should have loved me most, but found me unworthy of even existing. I drove away without looking back, tears finally coming as the distance between us grew. By the time I reached the highway, I was sobbing, pulling over briefly to let the waves of grief wash through me. When the storm subsided, I called Emma. "Can I stay with you for a few days?" I asked, my voice rough from crying. "I'm leaving Seattle." "What happened?" Her voice was instantly concerned. "I'll tell you everything when I get there," I promised. "It's a 6-hour drive to Portland." "I'll be waiting," she assured me. "Drive safe, honey." As I pulled back onto the highway, heading south toward Portland, and away from 28 years of trying to earn love that should have been freely given, I felt something unexpected beneath my grief. Relief. The 6-hour drive gave me time to think, to replay the devastating words I'd overheard, and begin to process their impact. Rain fell steadily, matching my mood as I crossed the state line into Oregon. Music played softly in the background, but I barely heard it, lost in thoughts of all the years I'd spent trying to be someone my parents could love. By the time I reached Emma's townhouse in Portland, exhaustion had replaced my earlier emotions. She opened the door, took one look at my face, and pulled me into a tight hug. "Whatever happened, you're safe now," she murmured into my hair. Her husband Daniel took my bags while Emma led me to their guest room. "Rest first," she insisted. "Well, talk when you're ready." I collapsed onto the unfamiliar bed, falling into a deep, dreamless sleep that lasted 14 hours. When I finally woke, disoriented and groggy, evening light was filtering through unfamiliar curtains. Emma sat with me at their kitchen table as I recounted what I'd overheard, my voice flat and emotionless, as I repeated my parents' cruel words. "Those absolute monsters," she whispered when I finished. "How dare they? The worst part is that I still love them." I admitted, fresh tears forming. "How pathetic is that? After everything, some part of me still wants their approval." "That's not pathetic, it's human," Emma countered. "They programmed you from birth to seek their validation. That doesn't disappear overnight." Daniel made dinner while Emma and I talked. He placed a plate of pasta in front of me with a gentle smile. "Eat something. Food helps even when it feels like nothing will." That first night in Portland, surrounded by genuine care from friends who wanted nothing from me but my happiness, the contrast with my parents' conditional love was stark and painful. "What now?" Emma asked as we sat on her couch, later mugs of tea warming our hands. "I don't know," I admitted. "Go back to New York, I guess. Try to get my old job back or find a new one." "No rush," she assured me. "Stay here as long as you need." My phone had been off since leaving Seattle. When I finally checked it the next morning, there were multiple missed calls and texts from my parents, growing increasingly angry. "Where are you? How could you just leave like this? This is incredibly immature behavior. Call us immediately." Not a single message contained an apology or acknowledgement of what they'd said. Not one expressed concern for my well-being or recognized the pain they'd caused. Their only concern seemed to be the inconvenience of my departure. I turned the phone off again without responding. The next few days passed in a fog. I slept late, took long walks around Emma's neighborhood, and cried without warning. Nightmares plagued me, echoes of my father's words about regretting my existence chasing me through troubled sleep. Emma and Daniel created a protective bubble around me. They didn't press for decisions or plans, simply offered their home as a sanctuary while I processed my grief. A week after my arrival, I finally felt ready to face practical matters. I called my editor at the Perennial, explaining that a family situation had necessitated my sudden relocation. "We're actually transitioning to a more remote workplace model," she told me. "If you're interested in continuing your role from Portland temporarily, we can make that work while you figure out your next steps." Another small mercy. At least I wouldn't be jobless on top of everything else. Emma helped me find a small furnished apartment near her home, available for a 3-month lease. "Perfect timing to figure out your next move," she said as we toured the cozy space. I decided not to return to New York immediately. The thought of the busy, demanding city felt overwhelming in my fragile state. Portland, with its slower pace and proximity to Emma, seemed like the healing space I needed. 2 weeks after leaving Seattle, I finally responded to my parents' text with a brief message. "I'm safe, but need space. Please respect that." My mother replied instantly. This is childish behavior, Annalise. Running away doesn't solve anything. I turned off notifications for their numbers. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my life. I set up my laptop in my new apartment and resumed work for the magazine. I found a therapist specializing in family trauma. Slowly, I returned to my neglected novel manuscript, finding that the recent painful experience had added new depth to my understanding of the characters. During our second session, my new therapist, Dr. Lauren, asked about the journal Id left behind. It was deliberate, I acknowledged. Part of me wanted them to find it to read it to understand how their words and actions affected me all these years. Do you think that would change anything, she asked. Probably not, I admitted. But at least they'd know the truth. That despite everything I loved them and wanted their love in return. That I never stopped trying to be good enough. Sometimes, Dr. Lauren said gently, parents aren't capable of giving the love their children need. Not because the child is unworthy, but because the parents themselves are broken in some fundamental way. Those words stayed with me, offering a new perspective on my childhood. Perhaps the problem had never been me at all. The first week in my Portland apartment was the hardest. After years of constant striving and people-pleasing, the sudden absence of external pressures left me adrift. Without my parents' expectations to push against or fulfill who was I. Emma visited daily, sometimes just sitting quietly with me while I stared at the wall, other times gently encouraging me to eat or shower or simply step outside for fresh air. I feel pathetic, I confessed one rainy afternoon as we sat on my small balcony watching droplets race down the railing. I'm 28 years old and falling apart because my parents don't love me. Shouldn't I have processed this years ago? Trauma doesn't operate on a convenient timeline, Emma replied. And hearing your parents say they regret your existence isn't some minor slight. It's a profound rejection. The nightmares continued, nightly visions where I was invisible to my parents, where I screamed for their attention but no sound emerged, where I was a child again, bringing home accomplishments that turned to dust in my hands. Dr. Lauren suggested I try a support group for adults with difficult family relationships. The first meeting was in a community center downtown, a circle of chairs filled with people whose stories echoed aspects of my own. My father hasn't spoken to me in 12 years because I chose the wrong college major, shared a man in his 40s. My mother introduces me as her disappointing child to her friends, a woman said. Not as a joke, as an actual introduction. Hearing their stories helped normalize my experience. I wasn't alone in having parents who couldn't or wouldn't love properly. More importantly, these people had survived and built meaningful lives despite that fundamental wound. 3 weeks after my departure, my parents began calling constantly. I let each call go to voicemail, listening to messages that ranged from demanding to pleading. This has gone on long enough, Annalise. My father's voice still authoritative despite everything. Call us back immediately. Please, just let us know you're okay. My mother's voice tearful now. We're worried sick. I shared the messages with Dr. Lauren. Notice there's still no apology, she pointed out. No acknowledgement of why you left. She was right. Not once had they mentioned their conversation about regretting my birth. It was as though they expected me to simply forget what I'd heard and return to the status quo. Instead of responding, I channeled my feelings into work. I threw myself into editing articles for the magazine, determined to prove my professional worth, if only to myself. I returned to my novel manuscript, with new clarity, revising scenes with the painful insight I'd gained. Emma introduced me to her local friends, who welcomed me into their circle with warmth and genuine interest. We had board game nights, movie marathons, and long conversations over wine. Unlike my parents, these new friends asked questions about my writing and actually listened to the answers. Your novel concept is fascinating, said Amy's husband Patrick, a high school English teacher. The mother character reminds me of characters in Plath and Atwood Complex, terrifying but somehow sympathetic. I never thought of that comparison, I replied, genuinely surprised by his insight. You should join our book club, he suggested. We're always looking for new perspectives. Slowly, I began building a life centered around authentic connections rather than achievement or approval. I joined a writing group that met weekly at a local coffee shop. I volunteered at a literacy program teaching creative writing to high school students. I adopted a cat from the shelter, a one-eyed orange tabby who purred like a motor and followed me from room to room. His name is Fitzgerald, I told Emma when she came to meet him. Fitz for short. Naming your cat after a famous writer, she laughed. Peak English major move. 1 month after leaving Seattle, I finally felt ready to check my email. Among the work messages and newsletters was an email from my mother's sister, Aunt Sandra. The subject line read simply, "The Journal." My heart pounded as I clicked it open. Annalise, I hope this reaches you. Your parents are beside themselves, though they're too proud to admit the full extent of their worry. They found your childhood journal last week. Your mother called me crying harder than I've ever heard her cry. I don't know exactly what happened between you, but I think you should know they've been reading it and it's affecting them deeply. Please call if you want to talk. Love, Aunt Sandra. I stared at the message, emotions swirling. They had found the journal just as it intended. But what did it mean that it was affecting them deeply? Was it guilt, anger, some defensive justification of their behavior? I wasn't ready to call my aunt, but I sent a brief reply. "Am safe and well in Portland. Thank you for letting me know about the journal." She responded within minutes. "Can I call you? There are things you should know." After a day's hesitation, I agreed to a phone call setting a specific time, so I could prepare myself emotionally. Aunt Sandra had always been different from my mother, warmer, more expressive, less concerned with appearances. When she called, her voice was gentle. "Annalise, honey, I'm so glad you're okay. Your parents have been frantic." "I'm fine," I said stiffly. "Just needed some space." "I gather you overheard something upsetting," she said carefully. "Upsetting," I laughed bitterly. "I heard them tell their friends they regret having me. That I'm their greatest disappointment. That 28 years of raising me was a waste." Sandra was silent for a long moment. "Oh, honey." "It's fine," I said, though it clearly wasn't. "At least now I know where I stand." "There's context I think you should have," she said. "I'm not excusing what they said, it was cruel and untrue. But there are things about your parents you don't know." She told me how my mother had suffered severe postpartum depression after my birth, so severe she had been hospitalized briefly. She was convinced she would be a terrible mother, Sandra explained, that she didn't have the maternal instinct other women seem to have naturally. My father, raised by a military father who showed love through discipline and high expectations, had no model for nurturing parenthood. When Jennifer was struggling, Thomas fell back on the only parenting style he knew: rigid standards and conditional approval, and it seemed to work in the sense that you thrived academically. So they convinced themselves it was the right approach. "That doesn't explain them saying they wish I had never been born," I said, tears threatening. "No, it doesn't," Sandra acknowledged. "That was unforgivable. But Annalise, finding your journal has shaken them to their core. They've been reading the entries chronologically, one each day, and it's like watching them realize for the first time what their parenting really felt like from your perspective." And I prompted when she paused. "And they're devastated. Your father called me sobbing yesterday, Thomas, who I have never seen cry, not even at our mother's funeral. They had no idea the damage they were causing, the pain you were in." "How could they not know?" I demanded. "Because they were so convinced their way was right," she replied sadly. "They measured love by what they provided for you, not by what you needed from them emotionally." Before ending the call, Sandra asked if she could give my parents my email address. "They want to write to you. I think you should let them, even if you're not ready to speak with them directly." I agreed reluctantly, setting a boundary that I would read what they wrote but might not respond immediately. The email arrived that evening, a joint letter from both parents. I opened it with trembling hands. "Annalise, we have been reading your journal. One entry each day starting from when you were 12. We are only up to your 15th year, but already we are overcome with shame and regret. The child who wrote these pages was desperate for our approval, our affection, even just our attention. You documented every criticism, every comparison, every time we focused on what you could have done better rather than celebrating what you achieved. There is one entry from when you were 13 that has haunted us since reading it. You wrote, 'Sometimes I think if they could trade me for a different daughter, one who was perfect at everything, they would do it in a heartbeat. And I would let them if it meant they would finally be happy.' No child should ever feel that way. No parent should ever make their child feel that way. Yet we did consistently for years. We understand now why you left after overhearing our conversation with the Wilsons. What we said was unforgivable. We cannot take back those words or undo the pain they've caused. We don't expect forgiveness, and we won't ask you to call or visit until you're ready, if ever. We only want you to know that reading your words has forced us to confront the truth of how we failed you, not the other way around. We are so deeply sorry, Mom and Dad. I read the email 3 times, tears falling freely. It was the first genuine apology I'd ever received from them, the first acknowledgement that the problem lay with them, not me. I showed the letter to Dr. Lauren at our next session. This is significant, she noted. There's no defensiveness, no justification, no guilt-tripping. Just a clean acknowledgement of harm done. So what do I do now, I asked. What do you want to do, she countered. There's no rulebook that says you must forgive or reconnect just because they apologized. I thought about it for days, discussing it with Emma and the support group, journaling my conflicted feelings. Part of me wanted to maintain the distance that had finally allowed me to start healing. Another part wondered if there might be a chance for a different kind of relationship with my parents, one based on truth rather than performance. After 2 weeks of consideration, I replied to their email. Thank you for your apology. I'm not ready for phone calls or visits yet, but am willing to continue corresponding by email for now. I need to know that you've really understood how your words and actions affected me, not just from reading my childhood journal, but throughout my adult life as well. Annalise. Their response came quickly, a longer, more detailed apology that demonstrated they were continuing to read the journal and recognize patterns in their behavior. They asked thoughtful questions about my life in Portland, my writing, my feelings, all the things they should have asked years ago. Over the next month, our email exchanges continued. I remained cautious, but found myself sharing small details about my new life. The writing group, my adopted cat, the view from my apartment. They responded with interest, and without judgment, a novel experience. Dr. Lauren suggested that if I felt ready, a meeting in a neutral location with professional support might be the next step. You can't rebuild trust over email alone, she pointed out. But you can maintain strong boundaries while testing whether they've truly changed. After careful consideration, I agreed to meet them at Dr. Lauren's office for a facilitated conversation. The thought of seeing them face to face after everything brought a wave of anxiety, but also a spark of hope that perhaps something new could grow from the ashes of our old relationship. The morning of our scheduled meeting arrived with a nervous flutter in my stomach. I'd chosen my outfit carefully comfortable but professional, a silent statement that I was no longer dressing to meet their approval. As Emma dropped me off at Dr. Lauren's office, she squeezed my hand. Remember, you can leave at any time, she reminded me. Your only obligation is to yourself. I arrived 15 minutes early, settling into Dr. Lauren's waiting room with a racing heart. The door opened precisely at the appointed time, and there they stood, my parents, looking somehow smaller and older than when I'd last seen them just 6 weeks ago. My mother had lost weight, the angles of her face more pronounced. My father had new lines around his eyes, and his normally impeccable posture seemed slightly stooped. They hesitated in the doorway, uncertainty replacing their usual confidence. Annalise, my mother, breathed, her eyes filling with tears. Hello, I said formally, not moving to embrace them. Dr. Lauren guided us into her consultation room, where she'd arranged 3 chairs in a loose semicircle with her own seat positioned slightly outside our triangle. I've spoken with Annalise about her goals for today, she began. I'd like to hear from you, Thomas and Jennifer, what you're hoping to achieve in this conversation. My father cleared his throat. To apologize in person, he said, his voice rough, and to listen to what Annalise needs from us going forward. Even if that means very limited contact, my mother added quickly. We're prepared for that possibility. I studied them, searching for signs of the controlling, judgmental parents I'd known all my life. Instead, I saw 2 deeply tired, regretful people. We've read through most of your journal now, my father continued. We're on your college years. The entries about how excited you were to go to Yale and how we managed to make even that achievement feel insufficient, my mother said quietly. I barely recognize the parents described in those pages, but I know they're us. How could you not have seen what you were doing? I asked, the question that had haunted me for weeks finally escaping. How could you not know how much you were hurting me? My father looked down at his hands. I was raised to believe that praise made children weak and complacent. My father never once told me he was proud of me, and I graduated top of my class at MIT. That doesn't excuse it, I pointed out. No, it doesn't, he agreed immediately. I'm not offering excuses, just context. I thought I was preparing you for a harsh world. Instead, I was just being harsh. My mother wiped a tear, and I was so terrified of failing as a mother. After you were born, I couldn't connect with you the way other mothers seemed to with their babies. I had severe postpartum depression, though it wasn't well diagnosed back then. Aunt Sandra mentioned that. She nodded. I was hospitalized briefly when you were 3 months old. After that, I was so afraid of damaging you emotionally that I focused entirely on your achievement, thinking that at least I could help you succeed in life, even if I wasn't naturally nurturing. The irony being that all I wanted was your affection, not your pushing. We know that now, my father said softly. Your journal made that heartbreakingly clear. Dr. Lauren guided us through a structured conversation, helping me express the pain of never feeling good enough, of the crushing pressure, and finally of hearing them say they regretted having me. Those words, my father said, openly crying now, I would give anything to take them back. It was a moment of self-pity and frustration, not truth. I have never, not for 1 second, truly regretted having you. You are the best thing we've ever done. Then why say it, I demanded. Because I was angry, he admitted. Angry that despite all our pushing and planning, you chose a different path than what we envisioned. Angry that you seemed happier and more fulfilled following your own dreams than the ones we tried to impose on you. It was easier to declare the whole endeavor a failure than to admit we might have been wrong all along. My mother reached out then, withdrew her hand when I tensed. When you left and then we found your journal, it was like seeing our family through a completely different lens. All the moments we thought were about setting high standards you experienced as rejection. All the times we thought we were motivating you, we were actually crushing your spirit. For 2 hours, we talked with Dr. Lauren's guidance. I shared painful memories they'd completely forgotten or never recognized as significant, an 8th grade poetry award they'd dismissed because it wasn't a real achievement. The time my father calculated the tuition cost of my wasted art electives in college. My mother's comment that at least your clothes hide the weight you've gained the last time it visited. They listened without defensiveness, occasionally closing their eyes in visible pain at particularly harsh recollections. I never thought of myself as a cruel person, my mother said at one point. I prided myself on being honest. But reading your journal and hearing these memories, I realize honesty without kindness is just cruelty. As our session drew to a close, Dr. Lauren asked what steps we might take next. I'd like to continue email communication, I said cautiously, and perhaps another meeting like this in a few weeks. Whatever you're comfortable with, my father said, a phrase I'd never heard from him before. We're in Portland for 3 days if you'd be willing to meet for a meal before we go back, but absolutely no pressure. I considered the request. Maybe lunch tomorrow. Something casual. Their faces lit up with cautious hope. As we prepared to leave, my mother handed me a small package. We brought this for you. No obligation to accept it. Inside was a new leather-bound journal, similar to my childhood one, but with a subtle difference. The cover was engraved with a single word, truth. We thought you might need a new one, she explained, for this chapter of your life. The gesture was small but meaningful. As we said goodbye outside Dr. Lauren's office, no hugs were exchanged, but something had shifted. The wall between us had not fallen, but perhaps a door had appeared, a possibility of passage in the future. The next day, we met at a casual cafe near my apartment. The conversation was careful but less tense than the day before. They asked about my novel, actually listening to my description of the publishing process and the revisions I was working on. We'd like to read it when you're ready to share it, my father said, even though I know parts of it will be hard for us to read. It's fiction, I reminded him. Inspired by my experiences, but not an exact retelling. Still, my mother said, it's your art. Your voice. We should have been interested in that voice all along. Before they returned to Seattle, we agreed to continue our email correspondence and schedule another facilitated meeting in a month. As we said goodbye, my mother asked hesitantly if she could hug me. I allowed a brief embrace, surprised by the emotion it triggered. We're trying to learn how to do this right, she whispered. Better late than never, I hope. Over the next few weeks, our emails evolved from careful apologies and explanations to more normal exchanges. They shared news about selling their large house and downsizing to a condo, a decision made partly to let go of the space, where we did so much damage, as my father put it. I told them about my progress with the novel and a new opportunity to write a regular column for the Perennial. A month later, our second meeting with Dr. Lauren felt less like a mediation and more like guided family therapy. There were difficult moments when old patterns threatened to emerge. My father automatically questioning the financial stability of my career choices, my mother making an offhand comment about my appearance. But unlike before, they caught themselves, apologized, and redirected. This is a lifetime of habits we're trying to break, Dr. Lauren reminded us. The important thing is awareness and willingness to change. By the third month of our cautious reconnection, I felt secure enough to share a draft of my novel with them. It was a risk emotionally. They would recognize themselves in the parents of my protagonist, see the damage fictionalized, but still painfully real. My father called after finishing it, his voice thick with emotion. "It's beautiful, Annalise, and devastating." I recognized myself in ways that made me deeply ashamed, but the writing itself, the craft of it, is extraordinary. "You really think so?" I asked the child in me, still seeking validation even as the adult recognized the irony. "I do," he said firmly, "and not because you're my daughter, but because it's genuinely powerful work. I understand now why you chose this path." "That means a lot," I admitted. My mother emailed her thoughts, characteristically more detailed and analytical, but concluding, "You have a gift for exposing emotional truths. I wish I'd recognized that sooner." 6 months after our initial reunion, I made the decision to stay in Portland permanently. I had built a life there, a community of writers, a job I enjoyed, a small but comfortable apartment that felt truly mine. My parents accepted this decision without protest, and even helped financially when I decided to purchase a condominium. "Consider it an investment in your stability," my father said when I initially refused, "not a way of controlling your choices." Our relationship continued to evolve with occasional setbacks but steady progress. They began seeing a therapist in Seattle to work on their own issues. My mother joined a support group for parents estranged from their adult children, while my father started volunteering with a literacy program similar to mine, finding unexpected fulfillment in helping others. The most significant moment came almost a year after Id left Seattle. My novel had been accepted for publication by a small but respected press, and my first author event was scheduled at a Portland bookstore. I hesitantly invited my parents to attend. They arrived early, sitting in the front row but giving me space to prepare. As I read selected passages to the assembled audience, I occasionally glanced at them, seeing tears in my mother's eyes and an expression on my father's face. Id spent a lifetime searching for pride. During the Q&A session, someone asked about my influences. "Actually, my parents are here tonight," I said, surprising myself with the acknowledgement. "And while our relationship has been complicated, their impact on my writing is undeniable. Sometimes we write to make sense of our wounds, and in doing so find unexpected healing." Afterward, as the bookstore staff were clearing chairs, my father approached me. In full view of my Portland friends and new colleagues, he hugged me gently. "I'm so proud of you, Annalise," he said loud enough for others to hear. "Not because of the book, though, that's remarkable. I'm proud of the person you've become despite our mistakes." My mother joined us, touching my arm tentatively. "You did this on your own terms," she said, "the way you should have been allowed to do everything." That night in my new journal, I wrote, "Today my father said he was proud of me in public without conditions or qualifications. It shouldn't feel revolutionary, but it does. Perhaps real love, when it finally arrives, always feels that way, a revelation even when it's desperately overdue." The journey toward healing with my parents didn't follow a straight path. There were still difficult days, moments when old wounds reopened or familiar patterns threatened to reemerge. During one holiday visit, my mother made a casual comment about my outfit choice that sent me spiraling back into feelings of inadequacy. Another time, my father questioned my decision to turn down a higher-paying editorial position in favor of maintaining my creative writing time. But unlike before, these moments became opportunities for growth rather than further damage. I learned to set boundaries clearly and without apology. That comment about my appearance isn't helpful. I would say simply, or, in making career choices based on fulfillment, not just financial considerations. And remarkably, they listened. Sometimes awkwardly, sometimes with visible effort, but they truly listened. "We're retraining ourselves," my father explained during one particularly honest conversation. "After decades of thinking we knew best, we're learning to trust that you know what's right for you." The most profound healing came gradually through consistent small gestures rather than grand declarations. My mother began sending me articles about authors she thought I might enjoy, showing interest in my world rather than trying to reshape it. My father called occasionally just to check in with no agenda beyond connection. For my 30th birthday, they visited Portland and organized a small gathering with my local friends. I watched in amazement as my typically reserved father chatted comfortably with Emma about her graduate research, and my perfectionist mother laughed genuinely when she spilled wine on her blouse. "They seem like different people," Emma whispered to me during the party. "They are," I replied, "and so am I." My novel was published to modest but positive reviews. The story of a young woman finding her voice despite a childhood of emotional neglect resonated with readers in unexpected ways. I began receiving emails from strangers sharing their own experiences of growing up under impossible expectations or with parents who couldn't express love. With my therapist's encouragement, I started a writing workshop for people healing from family trauma, creating a space where painful experiences could be transformed through storytelling. The work was deeply fulfilling, helping others find the healing power of words that had saved me. "You found purpose in your pain," Dr. Lauren observed during one of our now monthly sessions. "That's a profound achievement." My relationship with my parents continued to evolve in unexpected ways. When my father retired the following year, he surprised everyone by taking a creative writing class at a community college. "I want to understand your world better," he explained when he showed me his first clumsy but heartfelt short story. "And maybe understand myself too." My mother began volunteering as an ESL tutor working with immigrant families. "Teaching without the pressure of grades and expectations is so much more rewarding," she told me. I wish Id approached parenting the same way. 2 years after that fateful night, when Id overheard their devastating words, my parents sold their Seattle condo and moved to a small house just outside Portland. "We're not expecting to see you more often," my mother assured me. "We just want to be closer if you're open to it." I was, to my own surprise. We established a routine of Sunday brunches, twice monthly casual pressure-free gatherings, where we continued building our new relationship. Sometimes Emma and Daniel joined us, offering the buffer of their presence and the example of their easy, loving interactions. The most profound moment in my healing journey came unexpectedly during a weekend retreat I attended with my writing workshop participants. We were discussing forgiveness as a theme in literature when one woman asked if I'd forgiven my parents. The question stopped me short. Had I forgiven them? Could anyone truly forgive parents who had once said they regretted your existence? "I think forgiveness isn't a destination you reach once and then you're done," I said finally. "For me, it's been a daily practice, a choice I make again and again. Some days it's easier than others. But I've found that forgiveness isn't about excusing what happened, it's about freeing myself from being defined by it." That evening, I called my parents, something I rarely initiated. When my father answered, I said simply, "I'm grateful for how hard you've worked to change. I know it hasn't been easy." His voice caught. "We should have done it 30 years ago." "You're doing it now," I replied. "That's what matters." By the third anniversary of leaving Seattle, I'd found a balance in my life that once seemed impossible. My second novel was underway, exploring themes of redemption and second chances. My column for The Perennial had developed a loyal following. I had dated occasionally, though I was careful about romantic relationships, still working through my own attachment issues with Dr. Lauren's help. My parents had become, if not the parents I'd always wanted, then at least parents I could have an honest relationship with. They celebrated my successes without making them about themselves. They respected my boundaries and worked to earn my trust rather than demanding it. When they occasionally slipped into old patterns, they caught themselves quickly or accepted correction gracefully. The journal was the turning point, my mother reflected during one Sunday brunch. Reading your innermost thoughts from all those years, the hope, the pain, the longing, it was like meeting you for the first time. "I'm glad you found it," I admitted, "even though I left it behind in anger." Sometimes anger is the appropriate response to injustice, my father said, surprising me with his insight. Your anger forced us to confront truths we'd been avoiding for decades. As we celebrated the publication of my first novel's paperback edition, my parents hosted a small garden party at their new home. Friends from my Portland life mingled with a few Seattle connections, creating a visual representation of my past and present coming together in harmony. During a quiet moment, my father approached me with a small wrapped package. Your mother and I wanted to give you this, he said. It's not to make up for anything we know we can't do that. It's just a symbol. Inside was a delicate silver key pendant on a chain. It's from your childhood journal, he explained. The lock was broken, but we had the key made into this. To remind all of us that sharing your truth was what finally opened the door between us. The gesture brought tears to my eyes, not the painful ones I'd shed so often in the past, but tears of recognition and healing. That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat on my balcony writing in the journal they'd given me over 2 years before. It filled nearly all its pages with reflections on my journey. I've learned that healing doesn't mean erasing the past, I wrote. It means building something new on its foundation. The scars remain, but they no longer dictate my choices or define my worth. I've learned that sometimes the people who hurt us most deeply can also, if they're willing to do the hard work of change, become unexpected allies in our healing. I've learned that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary for authentic relationships. That forgiveness isn't weakness, it's tremendous strength. And that finding my voice not just as a writer but as a person allowed me to tell my story on my own terms. Most importantly, I've learned that love should never be conditional approval, should never be earned, and that my existence needs no justification. I'm worthy exactly as I am, not for what I achieve or produce, but simply because I am. The journey from that night when I overheard my parents' devastating words to this moment of genuine peace had been long and often painful. The diary they'd found had been the catalyst for change, forcing them to see me not as the daughter they'd tried to shape, but as the person I actually was, with hopes, dreams, and wounds they'd never fully acknowledged. In the end, leaving that journal behind hadn't been an act of revenge as it initially intended, but an invitation to understanding. Sometimes we need to share our most vulnerable truths to create the possibility of real connection. As I look back on all that happened, I realize now that the most important relationship I needed to heal was the one with myself. Learning to value my own voice, to trust my own judgment, to believe in my own worth, that was the true journey. And while reconciliation with my parents added a layer of healing I hadn't thought possible, my happiness no longer depends on their approval. That perhaps is the greatest freedom of all. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with people you love? Did you find it helped heal the relationship, or was separation necessary for your well-being? Share your experiences in the comments below. If my story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone in their family struggles. Thank you for being here with me today, and remember that healing is always possible even from the deepest wounds.